The Bronze Age collapse. A clay tablet is baking in a kiln on the coast of Syria, and the man who wrote it will never come back to read it. His name is Amurapi, king of a city called Ugarit. The message is a desperate plea to a neighboring king. Enemy ships are burning his fields. His own fleet is stationed hundreds of miles away, fighting someone else's war. He begs for help that never comes. Weeks later, Ugarit burns to the ground so completely that no one lives there again. The tablet survives only because the fire that destroyed the city baked the clay hard enough to preserve it for 3,000 years. Ugarit was not some backwater. It was a hub of the ancient world, wired into a trade network that stretched from Greece to Egypt to Mesopotamia. Bronze needed tin and copper, and neither metal existed in the same place, so kings wrote each other letters, exchanged daughters in marriage, and shipped goods across the entire eastern Mediterranean in a system almost as interconnected as globalization today. And in the span of about 50 years, nearly all of it collapsed. The Hittite Empire, one of the great superpowers of the Bronze Age, simply vanishes from the historical record. Mycenaean Greece, the world of Agamemnon and the palace at Mycenae, gets torched, and writing itself disappears from Greece for the next 400 years. Egypt survives barely, but never again holds the power it once did. Dozens of cities across the region show the same signature in the archaeological layer, a burn line. Ash, collapsed walls, and then nothing. For a long time, the easy answer was invaders. The Egyptians left behind carvings of a mysterious coalition they called the Sea Peoples, warriors who arrive by ship, destroy everything in their path, and even try to invade Egypt itself. Pharaoh Ramesses III boasts of defeating them in a massive battle, carved in detail on the walls of his temple at Medinet Habu. For decades, this was the textbook explanation. Barbarians from the sea toppled the Bronze Age. But here's the problem historian Cline lays out in his book, 1177 BC, the year civilization collapsed. Nobody actually knows who the Sea Peoples were. Egyptian records list names like the Peliset, the Shurdan, the Ekwesh, groups that seem to come from all over the Mediterranean, not one unified army. And more damning, some of these same names show up earlier in history as Egyptian mercenaries. The people blamed for ending the Bronze Age might have partly been products of the Bronze Age falling apart around them, not the cause of it. So if not just invaders, what else was happening? Climate scientists have pulled cores from lake beds and cave deposits across the region, and the data points to something brutal. A prolonged drought settles over the eastern Mediterranean right around 1200 BCE, lasting possibly a century. Pollen records show crops failing. Egyptian records mention grain shipments sent to keep allies from starving. When your entire economy runs on agricultural surplus feeding an army of scribes, soldiers, and craftsmen, a multi-generational drought does not just hurt. It pulls the floor out from under everything. Then there's the earthquakes. Geologist Amos Nur proposed something called the earthquake storm theory, the idea that this specific region sits on a tangle of fault lines, and instead of one catastrophic quake, the area experienced a cluster of them over 50 years, each one weakening cities that never fully rebuilt before the next one hit. Archaeologists have found telltale signs at sites like Mycenae and Ugarit: toppled walls, collapsed doorways, skeletons crushed beneath rubble that looked less like warfare and more like the ground itself turned against them. Picture living through that. Drought starves your fields for years. Then the earth shakes your palace apart. Then, while your city is still rebuilding, ships appear on the horizon, and you don't know if they're traders or raiders, because at this point, desperate people from other collapsing kingdoms are turning into raiders themselves just to survive. This is the part that makes Cline's argument so unsettling. It wasn't one cause. It was all of them at once, hitting a system that had no slack left to absorb a shock. Every Bronze Age kingdom depended on every other kingdom. Egypt needed Cyprus for copper. Cyprus needed Anatolia for tin. Everyone needed grain shipments when local harvests failed. It was efficient. It was also fragile, the same way a tightly optimized supply chain today can snap the moment one link breaks. Pull out tin from one collapsing kingdom, and bronze weapons stop getting made everywhere. Cut off one grain route, and famine spreads to cities that were otherwise fine. Modern researchers even have a name for this kind of failure: They call it a systems collapse, where no single event is the culprit, but a network so interdependent that a handful of simultaneous shocks cascades into total failure. Drought plus earthquakes plus famine plus migration plus war, each one making the next one worse, until kingdoms that had stood for centuries were gone within a single human lifetime. A few cultures did survive. Egypt limped on, diminished. Assyria held its ground. But an entire interconnected world, the one that let a king in Ugarit write letters to a king in Cyprus and expect an answer, simply stopped existing. It took Greece 4 centuries to write again. Historians actually call the years that followed the Greek Dark Ages because that's what it was, a genuine Dark Age, born out of a collapse so total that people forgot how to read. Back in Ugarit, the tablet Amurapi baked into permanence by accident still sits in a museum today, his final message never answered, a king watching the ships close in with no one left to call for help. The Bronze Age didn't end with a single battle or a single villain. It ended because 100 small cracks appeared everywhere at once, and nobody in the system had anywhere left to turn.